All right, welcome everyone to our Out of Reach panel. This is a panel from Homes RI to discuss the recent findings of the National Low-Income Housing Network's housing coalition's um, Out of Reach report, and to discuss how we in Rhode Island can work on housing, economic, and racial justice. My name is Kennedy Tate. I'm a community organizer for Homes RI. I'm joined by Brenda Clement. We'll be co-moderating this panel for you. I'm going to quickly introduce the panelists. We have Wilson Flores, a community health advocate from the Providence Community Health Centers, Ayana Melvan, a senior project manager in educational initiatives and lead for the Rhode Island Afterschool Network and the United Way of Rhode Island. And we have Shirley X. Moore, the co-founder of Be More Interpreting and The Rail. And we have Wilma Smith from the Voices of Homelessness and the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. So if you guys just want to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and introduce yourselves and sort of what you do in the community.
Kennedy, before we do that, do you want me to give the overview of the data first?
Sorry, yeah, continue.
Thank you. And very eager to hear the panelists' reaction to that as well, too. As Kennedy mentioned, I'm Brenda Clement. I'm director of HousingWorks Rhode Island, which is a research and policy organization affiliated with Roger Williams University. We're housed at the Providence campus. And we work closely with our colleagues at NLHC, National Low Income Housing Coalition, and others to collect data and information to make the case as to why housing investment matters and why housing has such a strong impact on educational outcomes, around health outcomes, and around our ability to grow economically. So I look forward to hearing comments from our panelists who are kind of on the ground in those various fields and see every day the impact that housing or the lack of investment in housing has in our state. The Out of Reach report that Kennedy mentioned came out a couple of weeks ago and shows that the average two-bedroom wage, and we define affordability and not being cost burden if you're spending no more than a third of your gross income towards your housing expense. So according to the Out of Reach report, and this is confirmed by data that we push out in our annual fact book each year as well too, the average two-bedroom wage in Rhode Island is $21.16. The average renter in our state earns approximately $14.21. It's not much better even if you're at a higher wage, according to our annual fact book in our last fact book in 2019, that even if you're earning a $50,000 income, there are only 3 municipalities that have apartments available for rent. So we know we've got a tremendous gap, and this is not new in Rhode Island. This gap has existed for a long period of time. We have just simply been underproducing housing, particularly at all income levels, but particularly housing for low to moderate income workers. And it's got to the point, as we saw in COVID, that with the onset of COVID, that it becomes a crisis, particularly for our workers who are essential workers, who are community health aides, nurses, cleaning staff, other individuals who are providing critical services to keep us all safe. None of those people can afford to rent any or own anywhere in the state of Rhode Island. If that's not a crisis, I don't know what is. And so we need to continue to ramp up the pressure and ramp up the need for investment. Despite this tremendous need, Rhode Island has consistently ranked last in the Northeast and in New England in terms of our state investment into housing. We've got some good news on that front, hopefully, with the governor's announcement about increasing the housing bond. And we're grateful to see that increased number. It's a great start, but even doubling the number as she's proposing still leaves us woefully behind, and will still be close to ranking last in New England in terms of per capita spending on housing. Not saying I won't take the money if the legislature approves it, but we know that we need to continue to advocate for investments as well too. And bond funds are great and money to help us produce more units, but that will take time. We also know that with the expiration of the minimum of the unemployment bump up and other and the moratoriums, that people are in immediate need as well too for both rental assistance and eviction legal assistance through the eviction process and other things. So that's a lot of stuff that I just threw at you. So I will stop there, and Kennedy, I think, is going to help us manage who goes next in terms of kind of your reaction to those numbers. Is that what you're seeing on the ground, and in general, your thoughts?
Ayana, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Ayana Melvan, and I am the Senior Project Manager for Educational Initiatives and the lead for the Rhode Island After School Network at United Way of Rhode Island. I have been doing after school and summer programming, which we refer to as out of school time programs, for over 20 years. I started as a young person in the programs as a CIT in training, and then worked my way up, and here I am. I've been in 3 different states doing the work, so in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, and it's connected me to the community in several different ways because we take a whole family approach. We do a 2-generational approach, so youth and their families, and do a lot around parent engagement and family engagement. And so why housing, is connected to the work that we do is because we know that if youth are not in safe housing, they're not going to learn during the school day at all. And when they come to us in our after school programs and in our summer programs, they are very vocal with our staff, our frontline staff, and they're very vocal with us as administrators about their struggles because we create a safe space for them. We're experts in creating social emotional safe spaces where they can do some social emotional learning. And so because we have those trust relationships with young people, we hear about what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And one of the massive concerns right now that our in-person programs are hearing, that our virtual programs are hearing, is that youth, they feel isolated and very small in this world of COVID-19. And yet the impacts of COVID-19, including housing, impact them tremendously. And so August 1st is it's a scary day for our young people. A lot of them feel like they're going to be homeless, that their parents are not going to be able to afford their rents or their mortgages. And they're concerned about, where they're going to get their next meal when their summer program is over. And they're also concerned about what reopening looks like in the fall, because if they're not in secure housing, where do they go to school? Mm-hmm. So, Brenda, the numbers, thank you for sharing. Unfortunately, they don't shock me because it's not just about youth. It's about the field of out-of-school time programs. A lot of our workers, they don't make that wage. They make under that. They make under $20 an hour. And so they're fearful as well as they go into the uncertainty of knowing if they have their jobs come fall 2020. We're trying to keep youth safe. We're trying to keep staff safe, and we understand that. But if we don't have out-of-school time programs, after-school programs in the fall, all those people lose their jobs. And that means they lose their housing because rent is due the 1st. We all know that. And we don't know what kind of supports there are going to be put into place, especially because we're not talking about gig workers. We're talking about frontline staffers. We're talking about non-traditional educators that are professionals in their field. And they're embarrassed to not be able to afford housing in the state of Rhode Island. And so I'm looking forward to hear what the other panelists say on this topic, but I know that the field is extremely worried, and I know that the youth are extremely worried as we approach August 1st, almost like a doomsday for them, and as we talk about reopening in the fall.
Shirley, would your thoughts on the issue?
Hi, I'm Shirley Moore, and I am the co-owner and co-founder of Be More Interpreting and The Rail, which is a co-working space in downtown Pawtucket, where we focus on supporting Black and Brown folks in launching businesses that leave lasting legacies and really transforms the future of their families for generations to come. And I myself have 20 years of experience in human services. So since I was 14, I've worked in some kind of human service capacity. And I too am not shocked by the numbers at all. I think, you know, we've seen it over the years in Rhode Island. We've seen this shift as we gentrify a lot of our urban core, right? We see this shift to increase rents. You know, I remember when I got my first apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment was $500. And now you're looking at $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 for a 2-bedroom apartment. That is literally unattainable for our folks. For many years, I worked at the Department of Human Services as a domestic violence advocate. And one of the issues that we saw pervasively was, if I'm on cash assistance and only getting $520 a month for my family, how do I pay a rent when there are long housing lists for me to get on, or the lists are not open and there's no way for me to get an apartment that is affordable? What do I do with my family? And we repeatedly saw families that had to sleep in cars, you know, just to have a place to sleep at night. So the numbers are not shocking. It's speaking to the attitude of this state, where we're devaluing people who are, you know, those minimum wage workers, essential workers, like my colleague just said. We're devaluing them, and we're really trying to find a way to cater to those Boston folks or those people that have come here and gotten degrees. We want to make the state nicer so that they stay, instead of making the state nicer and safer so that our residents can actually live here safely and nicer, and in a nicer place.
Wilson, what are your thoughts about the numbers?
Hi, everybody. My name is Wilson. Like I said before, I'm a community health advocate here at Providence Community Health Center. I've been here for about 3 years, but I've played other different roles in the community. I think the issue, I agree with everybody, the issue is complex, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. I know that here at the Providence Community Health Center, last year we started the Social Determinants of Health initiative. We're screening all 55,000 of our patients here at the health center for social needs, and one of the largest ones is housing insecurity, as you may know, especially in Providence. And I have an active caseload, so I follow patients kind of through that journey, through their housing journey. And it's a rather difficult one where they really don't know, so to speak, where to access the resources. There's not enough of it as far as like market rent apartments, and then obviously like subsidized housing, Section 8. We have trouble kind of accessing those resources for the patients, especially in a post-pandemic kind of environment. We find ourselves kind of mailing applications, coordinating different types of resources for the patients, all telephonically. So I have my perspective. It's really more from the field and what I'm seeing on the ground. Certainly in the past few months after the whole closure of the pandemic happened, I certainly saw an increase of housing insecurity, increase of people asking help with their unemployment claims, food insecure. And like, as you all know, you won't access your health care, you won't access your food needs if you don't have housing security for your children, for your family. So I certainly, in my different roles that I played, I started as a SNAP outreach worker, and then I ended up here at the health center. I've certainly seen the same issue play out in Providence. Since the start of my work in the community, it's been repetitive, and I don't see really it getting better. So I think that the issue is complex, and obviously for community health workers, case managers in the field, it's certainly a very hard task for us to kind of handle, especially in the pandemic type situation. So, you know.
And Wilma, can you introduce yourself and talk about what you think about the numbers from the outreach report?
Sure. My name is Wilma Smith. I am with the Voices of Homelessness. It's a program run by the coalition where they take individuals who have directly experienced homelessness at some point in their lives, whether they're currently or formerly homeless. And we go out and we kind of give our personal testimony to educate individuals about the realities of homelessness. From my perspective, on the numbers, it's not something that shocks me. I started working with the coalition as an AmeriCorps back in, I think it was 2006, right before the big housing foreclosure crisis hit. And since then, I've been on board with the coalition and like speaking with the Speakers Bureau and now with the Voices of Homelessness to educate people about the realities of homelessness. But I haven't really seen much change in terms of services and things being provided for homeless individuals. Everything is kind of like stagnant, and it's because Rhode Island doesn't have funding to support the needs for the housing. And it's like everyone who's trying to do something to create more affordable housing, they're all fighting for the same pool of money. So resources are stretched so thin that, you know, it's really hard to come up with an active solution for the issue when there's not enough resources to go around to fight the problems. I thankfully have been housed for the past 20 years because I have a housing subsidy. But if I didn't have a housing subsidy, there would be no way I would be able to maintain affordability of my apartment. I'm barely maintaining it with a subsidy. And, you know, we have, you know, a good amount of income coming into our household, but even with that, we're paying a good amount of rent because as your income goes up with the subsidy, the more income you have, the more you pay. So it's kind of hard to get off the subsidy when you're barely making it from one paycheck to the next to just be able to maintain what you have. So with COVID striking and people being out of work and all of that impacting everything, it's just making the crisis even worse than what it is.
All right, thank you everyone for your thoughts about that. Moving on to the next part of our panel. What are some of the ways you see housing showing up as an issue in your day-to-day, whether that be in healthcare, education, economic development, or the lived experience of homelessness? Whoever wants to start can start.
Kennedy, can I just add a little more context to some of the numbers as well too that might be helpful? As we've talked about, only 1 in 4 people who need or would income qualify for housing assistance actually get it in the state. Unlike Massachusetts and Connecticut and other states that invest billions of dollars into housing production, Rhode Island does not. And so that demand and that gap between it. And the other thing that I'd love to hear comments on is that there is by far and definitely an undercurrent of both racism and classism in this discussion. And I sit on the State Housing Appeals Board, and so hear it on a regular basis. So just would love to hear the perspective from people on the field about what they hear and see on the ground, or through personal experience, what you see and hear on the ground.
Well, if I can chime in again, I experienced homelessness both in Massachusetts and in Rhode Island. So I kind of, you know, have a taste of what it was like in Massachusetts and what it was like here. One thing I can say is that we don't have enough resources here in this state for people to access throughout the day. When you're homeless in Rhode Island, unless you have a case manager working with you, there's nowhere to go to do apartment search or to do job search or to get those skills to work on a resume or make phone calls that you might need to make an appointment for a doctor or anything like that. I know in Massachusetts, they have a lot of day centers where people can go to access those types of resources. That's one thing that's lacking here. And in terms of your question as to what it's like on a day-to-day basis with the housing crisis going on now, it's extremely hard because, as I stated earlier, you know, you have to often make the decision of, okay, am I going to pay this utility bill, or am I going to get food in my house because I make $1 too much to qualify for food stamps? So where's my priority? Is my priority feeding my family, or is my priority making sure the lights and the gas stay on? And it's like, those are the things that people face on a daily basis. And those are the things that I see individuals struggling with, you know, the affordability of everything. Because housing is not just having a roof over your head and a place to lay down at night. It's more, you know, like Ayana said, it's about education. Like, you have to struggle with, am I going to be able to, you know, send my kid to school with a snack so they don't feel left out when everybody else is bringing out snacks? Or am I going to be able to have extra money for my kid to go on this field trip so they don't feel left out when everyone else is going on a field trip? So it's like a trickle down effect. It starts with housing, but it's so many other things that affect that. And, you know, that's what it's like in terms of like the rent as well. Yeah, your rent is paid, but what about that car payment that you have to get you back and forth to work to be able to pay that rent? So it's just like a domino effect. You know, all the other stresses of life are attached to housing. So if you don't have one, then there's going to be chaos, large amounts of chaos somewhere else in that line. And if one part of the structure falls, then the whole structure falls. So we have to get out of the idea of, let's just give people housing and that will solve the issue. It's a lot more involved in that.
I also think that going back to kind of the comparison, Wilma, that you mentioned between Massachusetts and Rhode Island, you know, when my father was looking for housing in Massachusetts, there was a wait list for affordable housing. However, he wasn't on the wait list forever. People in Rhode Island are on this wait list for years, and it's frustrating. And the other comparison is, my father was able to live in a pretty middle-class, affluent town in Massachusetts, whereas in Rhode Island, the more affluent and middle-class towns, they don't want affordable housing unless it's for elderly. And it seems like even the elderly are screened. So when you talk about racial disparities in terms of housing, I think what's the issue, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, and what I've personally gone through, is that there's no options for affordable housing in these more affluent areas where there's space. There's space to build, there's space for people to live, and you can still enjoy life and have green spaces. It's not going to interrupt the flow. However, when you only want affordable housing, or you only are going to be flexible enough for affordable housing to be in your urban core, well, that's going to be why your waiting lists are so long, because affordable housing is needed. And, you know, to Shirley's point, I was looking for rentals just a few years ago. I'm fortunate now, I feel blessed because I'm able to live in the house, but it took sharing an income with somebody. When I had my own income, you know, rent went from being, like she said, $600 a month, you know, $700 a month to $1,200 a month for the same size apartment or the same size home. No amenities, no trash pickup, no heating assistance, no utility assistance, for a broken down place where you start pouring money and investing in that place because you want to have a safe roof over your head. I went for months without heating in one of the places that I was renting, and there was no tenant, you know, landlord communication methods going on because my landlord lived in Florida. And so it's like, oh, that's not our problem. You need to call National Grid. So I agree with Wilma about the problems growing and domino affecting. Like, there's so many other factors that start to play. And then when you have to choose between food, utilities, paying the internet, and rent. Those choices are ridiculous that people have to make them. And then also the comparison in Massachusetts. We need to start looking to our neighbors on how they get people off waiting lists. A waiting list is a waiting list. It is not a list that you're on forever.
I think, I think one thing that I want to just add is we are in a state that has a nonprofit economy, right? Like we're very limited in regards to businesses. We're very limited to real money. So we depend on grants, and these nonprofits, and I know because I worked for them for over 20 years, do nothing but pay people just above the minimum wage. So you have a bunch of people, some who might be my colleagues on this call, making $15, $16, $17 an hour, who are serving people out of their own crisis, which hinders their ability to be creative, which hinders their ability to really truly address needs, because they're consistently looking how to solve their own needs and are completely stretched. And I think that one of the issues that we have here is the lack of investment in entrepreneurship, in small businesses. If you invest in small businesses, then they're able to hire more people, right? They're able to expand into different territories and expand people's income, but we can't do that because there isn't that investment. And so there's this constant, challenge. You have people with business degrees working in nonprofit agencies because that's the only job they can find in Rhode Island. And nonprofit agencies with executive directors, middle-class white women who make 6 figures a year and pay staff $12 an hour to do all the heavy lifting, which is completely unfair and unjust, and just contributes to the issues that we're seeing. No, this is not just like, either you're homeless. I mean, there are working poor people who work so hard and cannot afford to live. And yet those are the people that are meeting people's needs in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so I also want to add to what Shirley's saying. It kind of really speaks to me. When I played shelter assistant role with families experiencing homelessness here in Providence, I did that for about a year, and I was going to say that there's not a good workforce for social services. There's a huge gap, and the workers that are on the ground, they've been around for a long time. They've been around for 20, 25 years, earning the same wages that they've earned 15 years ago when they started in social services. And it really speaks to home, because I remember, what I got paid to be a shelter assistant. And I often, personally, I found myself playing 5 or 6 different roles in one position, to a situation where families are experiencing dire needs. They're on the street. We do get the families right off the list, the Rhode Island state list for families experiencing homelessness. And it was very shocking to see the amount of needs. They need resumes. They need to apply for housing, all while experiencing that situation that the society tells them that they're different. So the mistreatment of, especially like Wilma was saying, of people experiencing homelessness is very real, and it hasn't changed. And that just really hit home for me, because there's a lot of social service workers that are on SNAP, are on heating assistance, that are helping their communities, but they're also trying to help themselves. So it's really a revolving circle. It's like a cycle. It's a never-ending cycle. And I've only been in the community not as long as you guys, only 5 years, but in 5 years it hasn't changed. Nothing has really changed, and the funding's not there, the staff is not there, and also the coordination of housing case management. I really don't know what housing case management it really is. And I've been here for about 5 years, and I can't seem to find any organization that really focuses on the whole concept of housing case management. I'm still looking. So it really speaks to mind that there's a lot of things that haven't been done, and they continue to not be being done. So Yeah.
So,
If I can just echo back
go
in
ahead,
on
Wilma.
what Wilson was saying, like, what is housing case management? In my opinion, it's a line item on a budget list, because it's something that, you know, it doesn't really, how can I say, it doesn't really help the situation, because you have so many people in need of housing, wait lists that are not going anywhere, case managers who are so overloaded. It's like, you can't really service an individual without the proper tools in the toolbox to service that individual. So to give somebody a fancy title like housing case manager, what is there to manage?
Mm-hmm. All very important points that you're all raising here. And just again, because I'm sorry, Shirley, were you trying to get in?
Yes, I just
Okay.
wanted to add, I think also, you know, in this whole case management, I mean, I could go on forever. I grew up on Section 8, so I have like a huge issue with stuff like this. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that my mom was on Section 8 forever, right? Like forever. And no one ever told her that Section 8 would actually support her if she bought a house. It was when I became an adult and became a professional interpreter and was interpreting for folks in the field that I found out that she could have done that whole time. So your people, even in those roles, are not operating thinking about the future of their clients. They're thinking about the present. So they're not coaching folks on how to get off housing. They're coaching folks on how to stay on housing. Like, just submit your paperwork. Let me process it for you. Don't worry about it. And so you have these people who don't have any other option but to stay in these places, in these subsidies, because there's no way to get off of it. When in reality, there's a bunch of programs that could bring them from where they are to where they would love to be someday. And yet the people are gatekeeping that information for certain folks.
Mm-hmm. Important point about trying to create pathways for people. And there are, as you said, a number of resources, not enough. I mean, there are Section 3 programs that are that public housing agencies can do that require or would promote work training and job training programs, again, trying to put people on pathways to jobs. So I think you're raising some very interesting points. Low wages in the nonprofit sector are true, but unfortunately in Rhode Island, that is not the only sector that has very low wages. In fact, about 18 of the 20 fastest growing occupations in the state, according to Department of Labor and Training statistics, are all low wage jobs. So a lot of them are in the healthcare space. A lot of them are in retail space, waiters, waitresses, food prep, you know, things like that we know are all low wage. And so I think, and this kind of segues nicely into one of my my next question, or our next question, is kind of what are the policy approaches do we need to kind of break this cycle and to get us out of this? And so I think we're starting to get along this need for kind of a comprehensive pathway approach, that it's not just about housing assistance right now, it's about how to help people move along the spectrum. So just curious as to, and one more thing before I shut up again and want to listen to you, is that Rhode Island, a lot of the tools that we do have in Rhode Island, quite frankly, are old and need sharpening. We've had an act on the books called the Low Mod Housing Act for well over 25 years that's similar to Massachusetts 40B law. And it is every community is supposed to work towards a goal of 10% of their housing stock as affordable. Guess how many communities of Rhode Island's 39 communities actually have met that goal? Any guesses for anybody who's looked at the fact book? 6 out of the 39. That's a failing grade in my view. And we only got to number 6 in the last year or so when Burrowville came on board, because they're working closely with a nonprofit community developer in the northern part of the state and had a comprehensive plan and approach to kind of get their numbers up. So just wondering kind of, you know, what other things do you see as kind of policy changes? Obviously money's important, but it's also about what other programs, what other ways can we kind of connect the dots to move people along the economic pathway?
I'd love to start that one. Number one, remove the competition for funds. Force collaboration. Force organizations to work together to bring forth solutions that are more forward thinking than self-preservation, because a lot of what we find are people just like trying to keep their jobs, right? So how do these organizations begin to look at their work and say, you know what, I know that I've achieved my vision when I no longer am employed, and so how do I work myself out of a job should be a line item in grant applications. How do you know you've achieved your vision, and what are you doing to get there? Because that's nonprofit work, right? It's really ultimately to transform the community. So you don't have a job, but you've lifted everybody else up. Number two, I firmly believe that in our urban communities, especially or low income communities, you're gonna find people with side hustles. I side hustled my entire life. I did hair, makeup, I sold coupons. I mean, if there was a hustle, I did it. My mom sold pasteles, she sold plates of food. Like we have side hustles. How do we invest in people that have those side hustles, which is really easy to identify because everybody in the community knows who braids hair, and how do we help them stimulate the economy and develop their own business and work themselves out of housing and out of the need for subsidies?
And can I lift up, you know, I think one of the biggest things, and Brenda, you mentioned it, is that there are low income wages, not just in nonprofit. And I know that in our world for out of school time, we partner with childcare and we partner with the daycare facilities, and none of them make enough money. They're small businesses. They don't get the support that they need. And I know that they have policy that they're trying to push at the legislative level with their campaign right from the start, because they're trying to show that they are needed. They are essential. They are here to take care of people's children while people try to go work or do their side hustle. And so when you're dropping off your child at a facility where somebody's not even making enough money where they have to do a side hustle, it creates a lot of different problems. It creates problems in so many different layers of how we look at how we pay people and how people move ahead. And then thinking about it on a higher level, you know, you have people that are in jobs where their titles are director or executive director, or maybe their title is that they're a CEO of a business, and they are not making the same amount that they would make as their white male counterpart. So you have women of color, you have white women not making the same amount of money, and they're struggling. So either they need somebody to help supplement their income, or they have to pick up, as Shirley so eloquently put it, a side hustle, which we all have. You know, I've bartended, I've waitered, I've waitressed. I've had to do several different things to make up and supplement my income to pay the very high rents in Rhode Island and to pay the very high utility bills. And the other thing is, I don't know how this is possible, but we need to look at policies around utilities. I think that my National Grid bill has been on a roller coaster ride. It's never consistent, and it doesn't make sense. When I've called to try to make complaints and figure it out, when I've gone to, you know, higher ups about it in our state, the lieutenant governor, everybody says, yeah, we're hearing these same issues, but there's no fix. And the utility bills can really cripple families. I know families that I've worked with directly that have been crippled by National Grid, and they don't make not enough money to qualify for the services. They make like $1 more, so they're stuck in these bills, and National Grid's taking them to court and crazy things for hard-working individuals. So when I first moved into my house, the first month we got our bill, it was $730 from National Grid. I didn't know what we had on. I'm going around shutting lights off, thinking I'm losing my mind. When I approached them about it, it took several conversations, me taking time out of work to be on the phone for 3 hours with National Grid because they don't have a facility here in Rhode Island or anybody that you can talk to in Rhode Island. And finally they found out about a few weeks later that it was their mistake. But I had already paid the $700 because they threatened to shut off my heat in the middle of February, which we know is one of the coldest months here in Rhode Island. And I could only think about those families that when they have to pay those high amounts, everything else doesn't get paid. Just like I did. My mom says you have to get a hat and you put all the bills in a hat and you pick that one out that month that you're going to pay. That's how I live my life. And that's not okay. So I just want to lift up that anything that could be pushed around trying to make utilities more affordable for people that live here and more accountability. And also looking at how much we pay our women of color, our people of color, when they're in the same exact job as their white male counterparts.
Yep, important point. Shirley just put into the chat that imagine folks that can't take the time from work or don't speak English. I mean, right now, thanks to some great advocacy, we have moratoriums in place on utilities until really next spring. By the time the winter moratorium kicks in, the extension will expire just before that. But the bills aren't going away, and so money will, people come next spring will, if they haven't been chipping away at it, will continue to have a big bill that they're facing. And if it looks like we're going to be virtual learning again and other things, children need access to electricity and Wi-Fi and other things that we know cost money. So Wilson, just curious in terms of kind of policy thoughts or recommendations, kind of wearing your healthcare hat, and what is it about the healthcare systems and the housing systems that we could work better? We hear all the time from Dr. Sendell and others, that wouldn't it be great if we could write a prescription for housing for individuals? And so anyway, just curious as to your perspective on the issue.
Yeah, well, so here at the House Center, we're fairly new. Case management's been around for a couple of years, and there is collaboration between other House Centers and other healthcare entities. But the merge between healthcare and housing institutions and organizations, that hasn't really gotten there yet. I think we're just touching the surface now, trying to collaborate with other organizations in the community that work in the housing world. But given that notion, I think if the state and at the federal level, they, instead of just handing out money and without any sort of restrictions or standards, I think the issue is the standards. If we're allocating and giving out money to every single nonprofit organization and everyone has a piece of it, then there's no collaboration. Everyone's kind of running their mission and we're just putting band-aids on everything. And since the start, since I've been in the community for 5 years, it's just the constant putting of band-aids. We're serving patients, but we're not really serving their long-term goals. So if we're not working to serve their long-term goals, then what are we really doing? So I know in the healthcare world, I think we are working on trying to collaborate a lot better with social service organizations, and we are, especially at the Providence Community Health Center, where we're identifying that there needs to be a merge between healthcare and social needs, like social determinants of health screening. I think it's a start to kind of have that conversation and hopefully collaborate with organizations that are doing the housing. But it's certainly not enough, and I think that's the problem, that collaboration is important, but there's also the funding, not enough funding. So when you don't really fund a lot of initiatives and there's not a lot of money to kind of go around, then we're kind of scavenging for resources. But I think it's certainly, long term, specifically here at the House Center, we will be working with organizations to try to collaborate and meet those needs of the patients, but it's certainly not easier said than done. So.
Kennedy, back to you.
Wilma, what do you think about the likely increase in evictions because of the coronavirus and the impact it will have on homelessness?
I think that it's something that unfortunately we're not going to be able to prevent, because I get that landlords need to pay their mortgages and stuff too, but people have already been stretched thin before the pandemic, and there were people who were already struggling to fight eviction before the pandemic. So now that the pandemic has hit, that's just pushed those people further down the line and closer to being evicted. And then you have other people who probably weren't affected before the pandemic, who are now facing the possibility of being behind on their rent or being behind on their bills. And now that's more people added into the pot. So it's unfortunately, it's something that can't be prevented, but it's something that we need to look at on a statewide level and put some procedures in place to kind of, deal with how we handle evictions. And to go on to the question about what policy changes, that's one of the policy changes that I know that the coalition has been pushing for, is to help seal eviction records. Because even if you go to court and you win the eviction, the fact that you were taken to court still stands on your record, and any landlord can see that and prevent you from getting another apartment, or that deters it. So we need to really look at those types of issues. We need to educate people about voting and how to make policy changes. I mean, just last year we had an issue in Pawtucket where we have new developers coming in to develop land, and people were fighting to have at least 10% of the new development being built set aside for affordable housing. And, we had people testifying, going to the meetings, and pretty much the city council and the mayor was like, this is not something that we need to be concerned about at the time. It's something that we need to talk about, but it's not something in this deal or in this particular argument. So we need to look at things.
I think you froze, Wilma.
Hello?
Hi, now you're back.
Yeah, so I mean, if we have this disconnect of like, one town does this and one town does that, it's not going to help the big picture of what needs to be done. So we need to get on the same page when it comes to like policies about affordable housing. And as Brenda said earlier, we have this rule in place where you're supposed to have 10% affordable housing. And a lot of the states, a lot of the towns are not meeting that benchmark. So those are the things that we need to do. We need to really look at some of the policies that we have on the books. We need to educate people about these laws and these rules and guidelines. And we need to get people out there voting and involved in the issues.
Yep, elections matter, that's for sure. Kennedy, is it time now? I think we're at time to go to Q&A.
Yes. Our first question is from the chat. What is the status of the moratorium during COVID? If anyone has the answer for that.
I can start and people on the ground can add to reaction. Technically in Rhode Island, we didn't really have a state moratorium. We essentially had a de facto moratorium because we had courts that were closed. And so they were not accepting new eviction applications or new foreclosure applications. That there was a moratorium that was put into place under the CARES Act, which was the federal act that was passed by Congress at whenever that was, the end of March or so, and that had a moratorium on federally subsidized units and or mortgages, which represents about half or so, a little bit more than half of renters and homeowners in the state. But that expired this week as well too, as did the bump up in unemployment benefits. So right now there is no moratorium either on the state or federal level in Rhode Island for either evictions or foreclosures. And that's not good news, obviously. Katie, I'm not sure, or Kennedy, I don't know if you can see other questions. I can't see anything else in the chat. Do we have any other questions?
We're not seeing any other questions at this time.
Okay. So why don't we switch back or to kind of continue back onto our policy or discussion around policy, or Kennedy, do you want to ask your next question too about kind of a thriving community?
Yes, so what does a thriving community look like to you? How do we tell that story? Whoever wants to start can start.
So I'll start, and I think Shirley introduced this idea of collaboration. I think that a thriving community is when we can actually get different sectors together and have them work together in a real authentic way, where they're not competing for funding separately or siloed, they're competing for it together. And what that means is actually people putting their agendas aside, their own personal or organizational agendas, and trying to think of an issue at that level in the community that they can solve together. I worked, in an initiative like that in Cranston for 2 years before I came to United Way. And I think the concept and the idea of it is actually very beneficial, because it makes other people in the community have a voice that they normally aren't sought out. And it also connects people that normally don't get to be connected because they're stuck in an office or because they're stuck at their business and they're not able to kind of reach out in a different way. So we had community conversations where people that were elected officials all the way to people who are experiencing hardships on the ground were able to be in this meeting where you had to wait to hear and you only have about 2 minutes to get your point across. These were more authentic connections because the interaction was safe and the interaction was giving them time to have discussion. And so I think, for me, a thriving community is one where everybody gets to have a to the table, is at an equal power position. And so if it's a resident versus a city council versus a town manager or a mayor, that everybody is treated the same at the table. Everybody has an equal decision-making power.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with Ayana. I mean, I think that, community starts with the people that live in the community. And, I definitely like Shirley's idea of like opening it up more so people who can have businesses, because if you're a business owner in that community, 10 times more, you're going to be more invested in what's happening and what's going on in that community. So I think educating people about the resources and the tools that are available out there, it has to start with equal footing. Like, I shouldn't know more about things that are going on in my community than my neighbor across the street. We should, put the neighbor back in the neighborhood and do more things. Do a needs assessment for each individual community and start working to check off those things that came up in that needs assessment. Don't just think that you can, fix Pawtucket's issues with the same plan as Providence, because they're two different communities.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any comments?
I really appreciate what Wilma just said. I would echo that. I think that, we typically, what we see in our community is like grants come in or funding comes in and we build programs that are for those grants, but we never ask the community, would you benefit from this? Like, is this important to you? Is this of value to you? Would this make a difference? And so we continue to try to fit the community into these funds, and all the while we see that the community doesn't move forward. And so really shifting the narrative to include, to gather the information from the community. What are your needs? What are your goals? Where do you see yourself going? And then, creating the opportunity or finding the funds to create those opportunities, to build those programs. That is what our community needs.
Yeah, I would also like to add something. That I think sustainability, I think it's important. One of the things I see is that a nonprofit organization comes up, they have a good mission statement, they have this whole purpose of serving the community, and then in a few years it dissipates or the funding doesn't come in. So how do we create better opportunities for the people that we serve in the community without disappearing the organizations that are serving the people originally? So the people that we serve, I think it's a disservice to the people that we serve in Providence and any community in Rhode Island if there's organizations that have a good intention to serve and provide a certain type of service, but then it disappears. And Rhode Island is one of the highest states with I think it's like over 500 nonprofit organizations. And if we could better collaborate, I think that would be probably one of the most important things to do to start the conversation. I think right now there's not many conversations happening to collaborate between other organizations. So what are we really doing? Again, I'll say we're putting a Band-Aid on something that's not getting fixed. So if we collaborate more, then we can have a roundtable discussion. Like Ayana was saying, that everyone has equal power. No one's overpowering themselves, or the larger organization comes in and talks over other organizations that might be smaller but might have a lot to input. And obviously connection between not just the agencies like where we work, but talking to the community, having roundtable discussions with the people that actually need the services. And maybe just that way we might learn something from the community members that we really don't know. You know, I think honestly, I think a lot of the times we're well-intentioned, but we don't serve or have like the citizens like talk about their needs and what they need. And it's just about what we want to do or what the grant needs to satisfy. And we're not asking those questions directly to the community.
So this is very intriguing. I mean, a lot of discussion, a lot of programs exist, and Homes RI tries to use the collective impact model. Ayana mentioned the Working Cities Challenge, or you didn't say it, but I just said that. I assume that was the group that you were talking about. And there are the HESs, the health equity zones that are out there. Are those the right models? Are those the right things to kind of engage the community? And are they just not to scale, or just not provided enough resources to do the work, or do we have that completely wrong?
So I'll go ahead and answer that, because I'm not working for the initiative anymore. I think that the idea is there in each of those initiatives that you listed. However, I think that it's hard in Rhode Island because a lot of organizations, as has been mentioned by every panelist, including Wilson just now, they come in and they overpower the conversations. And they also let grant funding determine how to react to community members because they're trying to think about their bottom line. When you do this work, I mentioned authentic and genuine connections. I'm really going back to the village mentality. If there was a problem in a village, when you think about it with an anthropological filter on our lens, when there was a problem in a village, everybody came together and they discussed how to fix the problem. If it's water, if it's food, if it's shelter. I'll give an example. My friend did some work in Ethiopia. He worked in a small village, and they had an issue because the women of the village were going an hour and a half on walking in hot weather to get fresh water. So the other young women that were youth came up with a plan to make a water filtration system that was closer to the village. And it wasn't one person, it wasn't one agency or some grant funded, big project. It was literally everybody just coming together, elders in the community, young people, and trying to think who had the idea and who had the wherewithal and the capacity to do it. And instead of an older person saying, oh, no, we're going to figure it out, don't have the youth come in, they listened to the youth. The youth were very gung-ho about it, and they got the project done. And my friend, worked for this big agency. He worked for the Peace Corps, but the Peace Corps didn't take over the work. They did the work with the youth and encouraged them. And so I mention this because I think we do have good intentions. We start from good, but we miss out on thinking about the village mentality and thinking about where we all came from and how we problem solved when it impacted all of us. And now when something impacts all of us, if it doesn't impact one person in power, they don't want to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that in order for something like health equity zones or the Working Cities Challenge or placemaking strategies to work, these community initiatives, that we need to really use the model of creating a decision-making process where everybody at the table has the same power and yields the same power. And that if you are an agency coming in there trying to overpower the work, that has to get called out. That has to get worked on, right? We have to talk about that and figure out better ways for agencies like that to plug in without feeling like people could lose their jobs, without people feeling like they could lose their services because they get served by the agency at the table, without people feeling like if they're a partner and they're another agency, that they would mess up their relationship. You know, there has to be some common language and some common ground that people come to, an understanding and an agreement that it's a safe, brave space, and that's how you make decisions.
Thank you. Can I back to you? I'm sorry, Shirley, were you trying to get in?
Yes, I would chime in. I think a lot of the work that is being done through those initiatives is very impactful. And I think that many times they've had great intention, like Ayana said, but one thing that is really key is the top of an organization, right? And until you start having the community members sit on boards of organizations, you don't have equal footing. You're still gonna have typically outsiders, white, middle class, you know, suburban folks making decisions for urban folks. And it's when you shift that dynamic that you begin to see people have the opportunity to advocate, like, no, that wouldn't work in my community. That doesn't work for us, you know? And so we need to really shift that dynamic. I would also say that we need to remove capitalism from nonprofit work. You know, you have these conglomerates, nonprofits, and they get all the funding, and then they try to subcontract to other nonprofits. Like, why are you doing that? What is the point of that other than self-preservation? And is that truly community work or capitalism?
Yeah, I think I have one more thing to say. Wilma had mentioned about having a comprehensive health needs assessment. And I think that's what we need. That's what we're missing. We need to canvass the community and go directly to the community and canvass and ask those questions. Ask 100 questions or a 50 question questionnaire and really ask them, what is it that they need? What's missing? What is not missing? And then bring that back to the round table and speak to all the other community agencies. And that's where you have the merge. You have the community and the agencies together. You're asking them directly what they think. And I think that's the component that we're missing. We're not including the community. We're having these roundtable discussions, these Zoom meetings, and nothing's getting done because we're not including the people that we're serving. Certainly there's a lot of organizations that are doing it, and I'm not saying that no one's doing it, but I think we need to do more of that and comprehensively as a team with other organizations, be on the same page. I think that's the best way to move forward.
Yeah, and I definitely think that the programs are a good place to start, but it needs to go beyond that. And I think the other issue is like accountability. Like nobody really follows up to make sure that these programs, these nonprofits who are getting these fundings are actually doing what they're supposed to do, that they're actually satisfying the requirements of the grant. I mean, yeah, they write them in as line items and they do things, you know, to have a few meetings, but it's not really being followed through the way that it should be. And I've seen and heard that a lot from people in the community.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. So what are our calls to action? What action steps can we make going forward with these issues besides vote? But you should definitely vote.
My call to action for folks is to really pay attention to all of the things that are happening around you in your community and take a vested interest. I know that people tend to go to social media and rely on it heavily for news and for information, but just asking your neighbors what's going on and just trying to attend community meetings is pretty helpful. And some of these organizations, they do follow through and they do host community conversations and community meetings and try to hear from everybody. And so my call to action is for folks to become more civically engaged, not just vote, to actually go to the meetings, show up to the school committee meetings, show up to the community conversations, go to your library, your public libraries where they are having these conversations. If you're dropping your child off at a after school or summer program, talk to the people that are there. We're all very connected to the community, and that starts the conversation about what the needs are. And it also takes you off of your own island in Rhode Island and makes you realize that you're not the only one struggling paying your utility bill, or you're not the only one having a trouble with a landlord. You know, the more that I started to talk to people, I realized that a lot of people in my community had trouble with the same landlords. That's helpful because then they can help you navigate on how to survive, because we're all in survival mode. So I just implore people to be more civically engaged. Our youth are doing it right now and they're making big moves. So please, please become more civically engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to help with a neighborhood association here in Pawtucket, and I serve on a board with the Pawtucket Central Falls Development Corporation. But, you know, people definitely have to step up to the plate and get more involved and be educated about, you know, what's going on in their community, because you can't be a voice for your community if you're not coming up and stepping up to the plate. So people definitely have to take the time to invest in their community, because you're the ones that live there and you're the ones that have to, you know, have access to these resources that are being built. So if you don't speak up on the issues and you don't get involved, then you can't really say nothing when things are not happening the way they should be.
Yep, somebody once said eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. So you have to be engaged and involved to make change happen.
Yeah, I think I agree too. I've lived in Central Falls, Providence, Pawtucket. You know, I grew up low income, so I'm fairly familiar with the disparities that, you know, we live in the community. I still live in the community. I live in Woodlawn in Pawtucket, and I grew up bilingual, and I certainly know that there's a lot of disparities, a lot of um, inequalities with language barriers, race, and everything that goes on in the community. And I just think that getting involved directly in the community is really important. If you're from the community, then you have the opportunity to take part in the community in whatever role. If you want to get a job in a social service agency, a lot of the jobs in the community go unfilled, or they people leave all the time. So there's always an opportunity to either do it for free, either do it on the city council, something somehow you a way to get involved either through a job or through a volunteer opportunity or through your local town council. There's plenty of things that you could do, especially if you live in that community. Like I'm assuming most of us do. So there's always an opportunity to get directly involved and give your input, give your voice, give your voice to the community, and maybe, you know, maybe there will be change. There will be better change.
I would just encourage my community members. You are the experts in your community. You own this community. You invest in this community by just living and breathing here. You're an asset to it. And so I encourage you to just take, like my colleagues have said, the opportunity by storm. We as a community have long time city council members. Let's refresh the community. Think about what changes you want and start reaching out to these people who are running for office. Start having those hard conversations. Don't look for them to give you solutions. Bring solutions to the table, because no one has a better solution than you for your own community. You're the one living and breathing and sleeping there. It's your community. This is not just a space where your kids play outside. This is the place that is waiting for you to step up and transform it. And it's waiting for you to take ownership over it. It needs leaders. And you are uniquely positioned to be that leader.
Yeah, I would just add that particularly kind of on housing and housing production, Wilma serves on PCF's board, which is the local nonprofit in Pawtucket and Central Falls, near and dear to my heart because I'm one of the co-founders of that organization many years ago. But if you don't know who's on the zoning board in your community, if you don't know who's on the planning board and other boards that control things in the city, you need to learn fast who's on them, and you need to try to get on them. Right now, they generally are a lot of white middle-class men on those boards, and so they're making decisions that impact communities for long periods of time and are not necessarily hearing from all the voices.
So thinking about the report and the stress that people employed in low-wage jobs may carry, and that often forces them to have second jobs or side hustles, what are suggestions or what are suggestions for community engagement and power sharing, and what are some policy recommendations we can make so housing is not so out of reach?
I think small business investment. We have so many entrepreneurs who have to work a full-time job. I worked a full-time job. My business is 4 years old. I worked a full-time job up until last year. So for the first 3 years of my business, I worked a full-time job and did my side hustle on the side. However, if we see more of an investment, you have these people that come from suburban communities that have families that could invest in them so they can devote themselves wholeheartedly to their businesses and see better results. And so if we have, 6 months worth of rental expenses or something like that to give entrepreneurs, give people the opportunity, people who already have thriving side hustles, right? Give them the opportunity to really develop this side hustle and support them with not only the social service piece, but the personal development piece, the financial piece, and not just like inject them with money, but teach them how to manage that money. How does money move and how do you make it work for you and those kinds of things? I think we'll see an incredible, and I'm sorry I'm talking fast, but I'm very passionate about this. I think we'll see an incredible shift in our society because people will have what they need to get from point A to like point Z.
I would also say, definitely small businesses, love that. But I would also say that, again, people need to exercise their rights as community members, write your legislators, call your legislators, call your local, state legislators, your federal delegation, call the folks in your cities and towns that operate the town hall, the city hall, because they're holding the power. And when they hear from more than one constituent, when they hear from 10 constituents, they're like, what happened? Why are all of a sudden everybody's calling us about this issue and they have to bring it up? And then go to the meeting, Don't just call and write the letter, go to the meeting and say, hey, I called you. Do you remember me? And introduce yourself to them because they're supposed to be representing you. And also take a look at what, your city and town budgets are doing. I sat in a group and showed them the Cranston city budget and the school budget. And this is a group that was trying to do a lot of action. And they were shocked because there were things that they had questions about for me. And I said, why are you asking me? Ask your city council people that put these budgets together because they're the ones that represent you all. The mayor represents you all. And if you have a problem with your city or town's budget, or if you have a problem with the way that they address affordable housing or public housing, then you need to take it up with the people that are supposedly supposed to represent you, even at the state and federal level, and tell them how much you care. So that's what I say to folks. That's the way to really kind of move it, right? And if they can't do it, you should run.
Yep.
I would say that we definitely need to look at more policies on wage increases and opportunities for small business owners, but we also need to look at policy on rent control and eviction moratorium.
I also think we need to be more creative in kind of the housing space and, also just not only produce housing, but if we're building a childcare facility, can we also build housing above it for the childcare workers? Can we, when we're doing a Main Street initiative and creating more retail space or store space on the front level, again, creating affordable apartments. We've done this and we've done it well in some parts. We just haven't done it to a big enough scale in all of the communities. So same thing with nursing home individuals and others. You know, can we create housing on or create new models of nursing homes that also incorporate housing for workers as we think about how to recreate nursing homes to prevent the spread of diseases like we've seen with COVID. So I think there's things that, and those are difficult conversations because the existing funding sources are in silos as well too. And so we have to break through those silos to make it work. But I think the times are forcing us to think differently and creatively about what we're doing.
Shirley, I agree with your comment in the chat that they're listening, they're not listening to voices, they're only hearing them. I totally agree. So Brenda, should we start wrapping up?
Yeah, and again, just to everybody's point that if they're hearing and not listening, then it's time for some people to go, you know, and new voices to go in. And so thinking that through and thinking through more about how do we encourage people to run for office and or run for or be engaged and involved in their municipal boards and organizations that make decisions. So that may be an action step moving forward. But so yes, I think we're about ready to wrap up. Kennedy, is there anything that you wanted to add or say as we wrap up?
Well, definitely thank you to everyone for participating in our panel and taking time out of your day to come chat with us. And as far as future Homes RI events, we're having a rally Tuesday, August 4th, so stay tuned for more information of that. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ayana, Shirley, Wilson, and Wilma, and Brenda for co-moderating with me.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just a reminder too, that we also have a hearing tomorrow now in House Finance on the new bond proposals, which includes an up to housing. So if you can, call your rep and senator, your state rep and senator, state rep at least, but also your senators, and say this really is important. It's not enough, but it's a good start. And so let's try to make sure we get that included in the budget. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay cool.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Homes RI.